Hi there. This is Mr. Harvey, and even though it's snowing, we're going to try to do this lecture anyway, or at least do a credible version of it. So here goes. I'm going to try to keep this short. I'm going to try to keep it to definitely less than half an hour, maybe like 20 minutes if I can. So we're going to blow through this pretty quick. So this is the second lecture from the course. The live class, we went through the news. If you missed it, you missed it. Sorry, but here they are. You can freeze frame YouTube and see what we learned about. So here's the review from last week. I'm not going to really kind of go over talking about the review, but you can see this in the PowerPoint, which I'm going to publish when I'm through with this. So we are on currently this second lesson here is where we're at in the course. So we're talking here about attackers, right? People attacking a computer system, and their methodology is pretty straightforward. These are key actions that they take. This is a version of something that's sometimes called the cyber kill chain, which is a military concept. And that idea of the cyber kill chain was created by a guy named Mike Cloppert, who was a teacher of mine back years ago. Works for Lockheed Martin. Okay, so this is the attacker's methodology. The first thing is sort of before the attack is reconnaissance and footprinting. This is passive information gathering. In other words, this is information gathering that you can do without actually reaching out and touching the target system at all. So examples here, like they say, dumpster diving, right? This is going outside, they've thrown stuff away and you're going out there. It could be social engineering. It's not really quite the right term here, but you could use social engineering, but basically asking, snooping around in social media, looking around the internet, looking at their website, and doing research, trying to find out as much as you can about the target without actually reaching out and touching the target. Scanning and enumeration is also a pre-attack phase, and this is also a form of reconnaissance, but this is active reconnaissance where you're actually using like a port scanner or other piece of software to reach out and actually send packets to the target network and figure out, okay, how many hosts are there internet facing on this network? What kind of services are they running? What can I see about the computer systems that I'm trying to get at? So this is active reconnaissance as opposed to the first phase, which is passive. At that point, then you want to gain access. So gaining access, your initial gaining of access can be done in a number of ways. It can be done if you're physically present over some kind of wireless connection, if they have Wi-Fi that you can get onto. There might be a system that's unsecured physically that you can get at. A system that has some kind of vulnerability. A web server or other server or web application that's exposed on the internet that may have a vulnerability in it. There could be a backdoor or some other kind of way in that since this is your initial gaining access that you didn't create but that someone else did. Or you could use social engineering techniques to get network access information, it says here. And this would be the kind of thing like fooling somebody into giving you their username and password and then just logging in to their remote access system as one of their users. That's a great way of gaining access if you can, because to the even if they're watching for someone to do something bad, you look no different than that user. If you know their username and password, you look just like that user, unless they have some kind of multi-factor authentication like we talked about last week. Once you gain access, then you want to escalate privileges. Usually when you gain access, you're going to have access as some sort of normal user, and you're going to want to increase your access privileges to gain administrative access. Often this is done by exploiting some kind of vulnerability or bug in the system or an application to get your process or your whatever programs you're running to allow them to then gain access at the system or administrative level. Another thing you're going to want to do, and often this will be done before privilege escalation, if it can be, which is maintaining access. Maintaining access is simply a question of not losing access. So oftentimes you've gained access by exploiting some kind of vulnerability, and you may be running some kind of malicious software that's allowing you to talk to the target system and connect to the target system. The problem is if the user of that machine shuts down the computer, now your program's not running anymore and you've lost access. So you want to take your initial access and you want to create something on that machine that will restart your malicious software every time the computer boots up. So you can retain access, maintain access, not lose access. So you might steal some additional passwords would be another way, right? I've got access as one user, but what if that user realizes something weird is going on and changes their password? I want to try to gain other users' passwords. I want to put some kind of rootkit, some kind of backdoor, some kind of persistent program that'll start up every time I boot a machine. Covering your tracks, this is kind of a key thing. As you do things, you want to, if you do write files to the systems, you want to put them in some place where they're unlikely to be seen. You want to hide them somewhere. Alternate data streams is a good way of hiding them. That's a feature where one file in Windows NT file system that's used by all the modern versions of Windows, you can store information in an alternate data stream, meaning what looks like one file actually contains multiple files. And it's virtually invisible to anyone using the system in a normal way. You might modify the log files in some way. Sometimes when as a bad guy, even a good guy as a hacker, right, or an ethical hacker, when you write a program, one of the first ways people are going to look to see, oh, hey, some hacker got in here, what did they do? They're going to look for the newest files. So you might modify the files to show a different time. You can actually manipulate the time that the file shows of when it was written to make it look like that file is older and like it's been in the system for a while, so they won't realize that it's new. Okay, so attack methodology. So these are just some sort of questions to ask about these different steps in the attack methodology that we've talked about. One thing that wasn't on that initial slide about maintaining access was exfiltration of data. Exfiltration of data is about, this is assuming that that's your goal, is to steal data, which most often as an ethical hacker, that's usually what your target is to try to gain access to and steal some kind of data that you shouldn't be able to get to. But it's not always, that's not always your target. Sometimes your target is to modify something rather than exfiltrating. So these are just some questions to ask in the process of carrying out this methodology. So an ethical hacker is going to have essentially the same process. One thing is that sometimes we have to be a little more careful because we're trying to make sure we don't do any harm to the system. Like I just had a conversation with a client today who was saying, they were concerned that if we tried certain things to break in, we could cause downtime, right? We could cause the computer to reboot or, cause some kind of problem. So they want to make sure we didn't do that. So, in an overall security methodology, in terms of developing a security program, if you're, let's say, for instance, if you were hired to create a security program for a company, you might want to assess what is the current state of security, develop some policies around what you want the security to look like, implement those policies as well as the technologies behind them, train people in using those technologies and following those policies, and then auditing. Auditing is where the pen tester or ethical hacker comes in and says, okay, well, so you've implemented your security that you wanted to implement. Let's see if it really is effective. Some other methodologies, NIST 800-115. This is a this is a U.S. government document that covers a security testing methodology. The Octave is one that I've never seen this used in real life, but this is another sort of methodology for evaluating security. And then the OSTEM, Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. This is one, you rarely see this actually used in real life either, because it's very, very detailed. So even when you see people say they're using it, usually what they're doing is they're sort of doing part of it, because it's very detailed. It's a really good methodology, but it's so detailed it would take you months and months to do a pen test if you did all the things that it recommends. So yeah, OSSTMM is a very, very detailed one. Okay, so down to the technical basics, right? The OSI model, as we've learned in the past, right? The 7 different layers of how data flows across the network, as well as up and down that network stack on an individual host. So here's some examples of key things to know. The physical layer you're talking about is what kind of cable is it? What kind of radio frequency is it? At the data link layer, the most important protocol at the data link layer is what's called Ethernet. Ethernet is a data link layer protocol that's by far the most common in any of the networks you're ever likely to work with. At the network layer, you've got IP, which is the fundamental protocol at the network layer. And this is at the layer at which traffic is routed from one network to another. The data link layer is only capable of routing within a network, right? In the same, without any kind of gateway or router involved, just on machines that can directly speak to each other. Like all the machines in our classroom are in one broadcast domain, and they can all talk directly to each other via Ethernet without going through the router. And then you've got the transport layer, which is above IP. So TCP and IP are the 2 really common protocols at the transport and network layer. And then session presentation application. The distinction between these is not nearly as important, and you're rarely going to have to deal with the distinction between these different things. A lot of times these are lumped together and just called application layer. And this is the layer at which you have applications that use the network, like HTTP for the web or FTP for file transfer, DNS, and so on. The TCP/IP protocol stack is a sort of a simplified version of the OSI layer that only has 4 layers. Like I said, those top 3 layers just get combined into the application. And then you've got the host-to-host layer, the internet layer, and the network access layers. The network access layer is essentially the physical and data link layers combined. And these 2 layers, I believe, this is not right. These are flipped upside down. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is correct. So the host-to-host is really the transport layer. It's usually called the transport layer, not the host-to-host layer. And then the internet layer is the same as on the OSI stack. It's that layer for routing. So these are the key protocols you see in the TCP/IP stack. IP at the internet layer, TCP and UDP at the transport or host-to-host layer, and then ICMP also really it uses IP as well, but ICMP is for network sort of maintenance and diagnostic purposes. Ping is really what ICMP is primarily known for, or trace route, but it also gives status messages, like if a message is timed out, that's where that comes from. The application layer, these are some key applications you'll see at that application layer. HTTP is by far the most common one that we're familiar with. Most of these use TCP as their transport layer, except for TFTP, which uses UDP, and SNMP, which can use either UDP or TCP at the transport layer. So, like I said, the host-to-host layer is what provides end-to-end delivery. That's what the transport layer is. It goes from one host all the way to the other host. It can be via TCP or UDP. The difference is that TCP requires a handshake. Both sides have to talk back and forth before you can really even start the conversation. And every packet is acknowledged as having been correctly delivered, or else it gets retransmitted automatically. With UDP, UDP is very different. It can be entirely one-sided. Like I can have a UDP protocol where I send you information. I don't even wait to see if you got it. I just send you information and I'm done. Or it could be a two-way conversation, but there's no handshake process that takes place, and there's no guaranteed delivery, meaning if I send you a packet over UDP and it gets mangled in the process, there's no built-in way to UDP for you to tell me, hey, can you send me that again? So like if you request something and you get back a garbled answer, you just have to request it again. There's no way to... UDP doesn't automatically provide that assurance of correct transmission. So like I said, the internet layer, IP as well as ICMP. ARP is generally in the lower... ARP is generally in the network access layer, because ARP is an Ethernet layer protocol. But ARP is basically how IP addresses are resolved to MAC addresses. It's kind of in between those layers in a way. It kind of connects the two because it allows you to figure out, okay, what's the MAC address I should be talking to at the Ethernet layer at that, and then from then on, it's usually... ARP is usually pictured as being on the Ethernet layer, but in a way it kind of connects the two layers between the Ethernet and the internet layer. Or the Ethernet or the network access layer, right? Ethernet is by far the most common network access layer protocol. Even Wi-Fi is wireless Ethernet. And a MAC address is all the way down, it's a specific physical address that's permanently associated with a specific network interface. So if we want to create a network, these are just some basic network diagrams, key features, right? This network has 2 layers of firewalls. Often this will be done so that hosts that are intended for outside people to reach in via the internet through the firewall and talk to these hosts are often behind one layer of firewalls, and then there'll be a second layer of firewalls that you're truly in. This is stuff that would be in what sometimes is called a demilitarized zone, or DMZ. These are things where we intentionally allow people from outside to come in and access. Obviously, for instance, your web server, it's going to have to be accessible from outside. Other features you might have are things like a intrusion detection system outside the firewall or in the firewall, or these days it's really, inside or outside the firewall. These days it's often integrated with the firewall, and the intrusion detection system is part of the firewall. That's actually probably the most common thing today. Most firewalls these days, or what people call firewalls, are really sort of multi-purpose security appliances. So our lab this week is about packet analysis. All the data on the network can be sniffed. So sniffing it applies to essentially recording all the network traffic as it's passing through. So if you can manage to get your system so that the network traffic has to pass by your system or be echoed to your system by, say, the switch or router, then you can sniff the traffic that's going on the network. Also, if you're dealing with unencrypted Wi-Fi, you may be able to sniff the traffic right out of the air with the right kind of antenna. So this is, for instance, if you had, say, a forensic appliance, or if you're running this network and you want to be able to have a copy of all the network traffic, then what it's showing here is you got your firewall, and then inside your firewall there's this network tap. So the primary network connection is from the firewall to this switch to all the internal hosts, which would be over here, right? Your wireless, that all your wireless are connected to, this Active Directory, and then there would be tons of more workstations and stuff all connected to this switch. What this network tap does is every packet that goes in, and out, it sends it makes a copy and sends it over to this machine, which is sniffing all the traffic on the entire network. And a lot of companies do that, so they have a record of all the traffic in case there's some kind of incident or problem they get hacked into. They can figure out what happened. So that's what this forensic appliance or packet analysis system, that's how that would work. So this is an example of Wireshark being used. Wireshark is really, really common graphical program for packet analysis. You can sniff packets with Wireshark, but what Wireshark is really doing is it's using TCP dump to dump the packets and sniff the packets. But it manages the process for you. So you can use Wireshark to sniff the packets, or you can use Wireshark to open a file that contains a record of previously captured packets, like that PCAP file that we are going to be looking at in the lab this week. Is that kind of thing. You open it with Wireshark in order to view previously captured packets. How can you avoid someone illegitimately sniffing traffic on the network, right? So an attacker, there's various ways an attacker might try to insert himself on the network in such a way that he can sniff traffic going between hosts on the network. There's a couple of ways that you can mitigate this. One is by using virtual LANs on your switch. If you have smart switches, you can use virtual LANs, and you can if you have a switch also, it shouldn't be echoing the majority of traffic out to all the ports unless somebody can. One thing that somebody may try to do is called ARP poisoning. If you remember, we looked at ARP a few slides earlier. ARP poisoning is where you lie about what your IP address is, essentially, and tell another host that says, hey, which machine has this IP address? You say, ooh, I do. And you poison the ARP conversation so that someone will send you the packets, and then you just pass them on to the legitimate host and make a copy for yourself in order to sniff the traffic. That's a type of man-in-the-middle attack. A man-in-the-middle attack is any way that an attacker tries to get traffic from one machine to another to flow through his machine so he can see it and sniff it. Sniffing should capture only all the data on the wire. Snort, this is the Snorty the pig, who's a common symbol of sniffing or snorting traffic. But sniffing is often used for troubleshooting network issues, inspecting network traffic to ensure it's not malicious. Encrypted protocols make it a lot harder. If you're sniffing a web session, but it's an HTTPS web session, a lot of it you can't really read. It makes it a lot more difficult. So that's another way of avoiding the bad guys sniffing, is to encrypt everything. So this is just an example of what Wireshark does, what it looks like. The reasons as a bad guy for sniffing are to see if you can sniff things going by, like, first of all, just sensitive data that you can actually sniff, but also potentially authentication data, passwords, or even just information that will help you understand how the network operates better. Sniffing can give you a wealth of data as an attacker. Right, this is a network vulnerability detection system. Probably all have already taken that class on intrusion detection systems. This is an intrusion detection system with rules for detecting traffic that appears to be malicious. So sniffing is obviously a technique that is used by the network defenders to sniff the traffic so you can do intrusion detection on it. So these are the things we talked about, summarizing the lecture. Kept it under half an hour, so I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to make another video, might not get it posted till a little bit later, just showing the very beginning of going through the labs to make sure everybody understands who wasn't able to join us for the live class. But I'll see you then, and thanks for watching the video.